Physical cash is still being manufactured. Here in the United Kingdom, I just got from the bank some new beautiful polymer banknotes with a transparent window, with Winston Churchill on the back, and with the late Queen Elizabeth being replaced by King Charles, mother and son. Quite cute to look at them side by side. But my prediction is that sooner or later banknotes will go the way of the dodo. What will replace them? My second prediction is that Bitcoin and other decentralized cryptocurrencies, which are all the rage nowadays, will never actually become money, meant as something you can use to buy stuff in real life. Why? I published a position paper about it, which stimulated the curiosity of my brilliant undergraduate student David McIntosh, whom we already saw on this channel talking with me about AI when ChatGPT came out. So here's David grilling me on why Bitcoin and friends will never be cash, what else will happen instead, and why the seemingly frivolous issue of cash becoming digital will have profound consequences for freedom, surveillance, civil liberties, taxation, crime, and economical stability around the world. I'm really passionate about digital cash as a research area in security with plenty of difficult unsolved problems, and I believe we are at a historical turning point where an enterprising and fearless PhD student could do really exciting work that would have dramatic impact on the technological infrastructure of the digital society of tomorrow. I'm even launching a new graduate level course on digital money this coming year, and for that I've recruited an expert friend of mine who has experience as chief financial officer, head of trading, and deputy general manager of a major bank, among other things. This is super cool stuff, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Digital money. Over to David.
Hello, Professor Staiano. I'm David. I'm once again interviewing you. And today we're going to be talking about cryptocurrency, or perhaps more specifically digital cash in general. So recently, I think this year you came out with a paper, you wrote a paper called, quite provocatively titled, Sleepwalking into Disaster, about digital cash in general, what's going on in that sort of sector right now, what are some problems with that, and what we could hope to make better. And I thought we could talk about that today. So
great.
Sound good? Fantastic.
Thanks for finding out about my paper and finding it interesting. I'm happy to answer any question you have.
Yeah, it's a very good paper. It's very digestible. So we'll make sure that's in the description. We won't talk too much about some of the more complex topics in that, but we'll kind of springboard into it at the end. So I thought, just to kick us off then, could you give a kind of layman's introduction to what cryptocurrency is, just from a mechanistic perspective, and then we'll talk about maybe some more of the social things.
Right. Okay. Sure. So the premise of my paper was what's going to happen with this society going towards digital cash. And first, I thought I should explain what I mean by digital cash. And many people that I know and interact with don't even wear a wallet anymore. I don't wear a wallet anymore. I do all these things by pay with your watch and all that kind of stuff. Is that digital cash? Well, not exactly. It's a way of paying using digital means, but it's not what I mean by digital cash. Is Bitcoin digital cash? Well, yes, Bitcoin would be digital cash. What's the difference between those things? So digital cash would be something where essentially you have a bit string and you trade that like you trade banknotes or coins or paper like that. So that seems already a bit absurd, because a bit string, the defining property of a bit string is that you can copy it indefinitely without losing any information. And so if I can give you a bit string, and this is equivalent to giving you a £50 note, but I can also have a copy. I can give that same one to someone else, which I can't do with a £50 note. How can this work with cash? Is this something we should investigate?
Yes. So I guess the next question is, how could that possibly work? How could you stop someone
How
copying
could that
it?
possibly work? Well, clearly it wouldn't work if I were just to transfer the bit string as is. There has to be some kind of change, some kind of transformation that happens in the transaction in which I give it to you, which preserves its validity, but makes it not possible for me to give the same string to someone else. So once I give the string to you, I give you a different version of the string that could only be derived from the string I have. I mean, you can't make it out of thin air. But at the same time as I give it to you, it invalidates the copy of the string that I had. So I give you a slightly different version of the string. And so cryptographers have been thinking about this for decades and thinking of clever ways of making it possible to transfer a bit string in a way that would preserve the value but not make double spending possible.
Yes, and that's kind of the first sort of hurdle we have to jump over. If I give, all my friends a copy of the string and then we all buy something with it, that's clearly an issue. So I guess what kind of, how does cryptocurrency solve this problem in the sense of Bitcoin or blockchain?
So all this rests on top of the fundamental world-changing discoveries of the 1970s about public key cryptography. In public key cryptography, you have a separate private key and public key, and you can encrypt something to someone without having had a prior exchange of keys, and we will not go into all the crypto, but another primitive that this enables is the digital signature, meaning that I could sign something, some bit string, I could sign it digitally, and so long as my private key is kept private, then we can see that from theoretical computational complexity argument, nobody else could have generated a signature that passes the verification other than the holder of the secret key. And so on that basis, if we believe the assumption that nobody has had access to my secret key, only I could have generated that signature. Now, on top of that, you can build a very basic form of digital money by saying the bank, very abstract construct here, the bank could write a statement that says, I will pay the bearer £50 if they present this string. And so if ever this string comes back to the bank, then the bank will give them the equivalent of £50 in some other form. Okay?
Yes.
And the bank signs this statement, which is also a bit string, digitally. And then from then on, nobody can make it other than the bank. So this thing could go around, and when it comes back to the bank gives money to the person. Now, clearly, that doesn't solve the double spending problem, because you could make copies of that, and you go to the bank, you get the £50 that someone else goes, and the bank is not very well off in this situation. So the bank would need to make sure that once it has received it, one of these messages has been cashed in, and the bank keeps a kind of register where it says, well, let me put a serial number in this. I'm going to pay £50 to the bearer of this and serial number, and there's a unique number in there.
Yes.
And when it sees that thing, it says, okay, well, that one, I've already paid it off. And someone comes with the same one, sorry, you're too late. And I've already paid this, and so it's no longer valid. It basically cancels that particular serial number once the bank has seen it, has been redeemed. That's it. So that would solve the double spending, not always in favor of the right party, because it just means the first one who gets to the bank gets to spend it.
Yes.
So you could trick me by saying, oh, and here's a string that's worth £50, and immediately you run to the bank, and then when I go to the bank believing the signature of the bank, it says, sorry, this has already been cashed in, so it's worthless to me. So it doesn't solve all the problems. So you can see the beginning of a solution there. There's another aspect which distinguishes digital cash from other digital transfers, such as making a BACS payment. You give me your sort code and account number. I can transfer £50 to you by ordering my bank to send it to you.
Yes.
That's got nothing to do with digital cash. It's just a transfer, but it's logged everywhere that I, Frank, paid David £50. And one of the features of cash is this anonymity, that the £50 look the same £50. I mean, there is a serial number, nobody looks at the serial number. Nobody keeps track that I paid you the £50, but if I pay with a direct bank transfer, then there is an undeniable trail that I paid. And so people who wanted the digital version to be more similar to the cash that we are used to wanted to think of a way that this anonymity could be preserved in some form. So that's another layer of complications and ingenuity that the cryptographers have been thinking about since the 1980s. And I don't know if you want me to go into that, but there's ways of dealing with that. So combining that with the double spending, there was stuff that was again invented in the 1980s, where if you spend the money you preserve your anonymity. If you try to spend it the second time, then this would reveal who you were. And so that was supposed to be a deterrent in the sense that the second time you spend it, we can send the police because we know who you are.
Absolutely, yes.
So that's stuff that has existed for a long time as theory, very clever theory, but in practice it has never been adopted in the market. And people have tried, most famous is this David Chaum, who was the inventor of many of these fundamental primitives, started the company, DigiCash and all the stuff. None of that, to make a long story short, none of this ever had much traction in the market. Now, fast forward some more time, and 2009, 2010, Bitcoin appears. Nobody knows who this Satoshi Nakamoto is, but publishes a paper, and not just a paper, but also some code that implements a protocol which solves this double spending issue in a rather different way. Do you want me to talk about the mechanics of that?
I think that would be interesting, yeah.
Okay, so the previous way of solving the double spending issue was that the bank would sign these bit strings in a way that would preserve anonymity so long as you didn't double spend. And when you spent twice, you could open up the message and see who it was. But there was still a central entity who was issuing these things. And one of the motivations behind Bitcoin was not to have the central entity. Because if we just go higher up rather than just the mechanics of how it works, and we look at what they were trying to do that hadn't been done before, was to remove the power of the central bank to print more money. So 2009 was after 2008. And 2008 was that big financial markets crisis where things in the financial world had been manipulated. And the fact that the central bank can print more money means that the money that I was holding before they printed more money is now worth less, because the same goods in the real world can be bid for by the greater amount of money that is in circulation.
Yes, a sort of hidden tax on the poor, you said, or on everyone, you said in your paper. The printing of more money is a stealth tax on anybody who's holding any of the money. Yeah.
And people who don't have any money are not affected, but people who had money, any amount of money, that amount of money is now worth less.
And so, sort of when I was younger, I had the kind of idea that maybe that would be a good thing, in that richer people do get taxed more, and that kind of creates better equality. But I think the main issue you were saying in your paper as well is that it massively drives up inflation, because people don't really understand the value of their money anymore, and it has a lot of sort of hidden harms, which are more than just taxing people explicitly.
Well, the point is that what I, as a scientist, find wrong, and never mind, the socioeconomic aspect and so on,
yes,
is to change the reference. Okay, so if it's a bit like saying, and now, stuff that you might buy on a regular basis, like your groceries. Okay, are you into beer?
Not particularly.
No, okay.
I can't say.
Milk. Do you buy a pint of milk?
We'll go with milk,
okay.
yes.
Right.
I've brought a pint of milk.
If you buy a pint of milk, and then there's, the government decides how much a pint is, and today a pint is a bit smaller, and you still pay for a pint of milk the pint of milk the same amount that you paid before. Now you're getting less milk.
Yes.
Right? But because it's sold as a pound of milk, and they make the carton more or less the same, they actually do that. They sell you packets of crisps, and they get smaller by the season, but they still charge you the same price, as to pretend that nothing's changed. But actually what has changed is that the amount you buy, one packet, is less than before. So you're paying more, even though it's the same amount of pennies, right?
Okay, yes.
And people don't notice that they're being charged more unless they're very careful, because what's being changed is not the sticker price, but the unit in which the things are being changed. So this is very fraudulent. I think that as a scientist, I would like, if there's a need to impose a tax, okay, well, impose a tax, you're going to be unpopular, they're not going to vote for you the next time, and so on and so on. But at least you have to be upfront. You need the money, you impose a tax, we're forced to pay the tax, okay, and then you pay the consequences of having imposed a tax. But this is a way of imposing a tax pretending that nothing's happened. Oh yeah, well, inflation has happened. Inflation has gone to 2%, 4%, 10%, 15%. And it's not my fault. Well, it is your fault if you've been printing money.
And it tends to be as well the people who do sort of have the power can kind of push things around to make sure that all of that tax does go to people without power as well. So I think, I'd agree that it's an issue.
It would be more honest just to say, we need more money, let's find the money by raising taxes. But that's very unpopular. It requires many people to agree and so on and so on. Whereas changing, printing more money, nobody notices, and it's very easy to do without too much political uproar. Now, one thing that is particularly unfair about printing more money is that the value of money changes not immediately. Like they print another 50 billion pounds.
Yep.
It's not like the money in your pocket is suddenly worth less. It takes a while for people to readjust to the fact that other people, everybody's received a pay rise. Suddenly, magically, people have more money. Oh, I think I will spend this that I thought I couldn't afford. And so as this gradually goes through the population, then everybody's money is worth less. But if someone is aware to the fact, okay, well, tomorrow they're going to change the situation by printing a lot of money and dumping it into the system, then if I can spend my money just then I will not suffer the effects of the devaluation that will then be suffered by people in a month, 2 months, 6 months, when the thing percolates through the system. So it's only people who are very alert to the fact that the quantitative easing is happening that can then take advantage of it, and that's a bit unfair on the rest of the population who just said, I'm being very good and I'm restraining myself and not buying this thing that I would want to buy so that I can save something, and they go through lots of sacrifices to save something, but then suddenly what they had set aside is worth less. It's like someone goes and steals some of their savings.
Yes, that's a nice analogy. Okay, so we've worked out that there are certain incentives for not wanting some kind of central organisation to
if we go back to what you were asking me about Bitcoin, it's that Bitcoin, one of the reasons for inventing Bitcoin was to say, I want a currency where it's not going to be possible to do quantitative easing.
Yes.
I want a currency where this manipulation is not allowed by the system. So I often tell my computer science students, and you must have been in a class of mine in your first year, that because you are a computer scientist and you can program, you have a superpower, and this superpower is that you can basically write the laws of physics of the digital society. And so in that sense, Bitcoin tried to make a universe of money where the laws of physics said it's impossible to do quantitative easing, in the same way that it's impossible for this microphone, if I let it go, to fall upwards, right?
Yes.
So there are things that the government can say, well, and I don't care, but I'm going to change the rules. Money, I'm going to print more money. Say, oh, you can't. I'm the government. I do what I want. And in this universe that Bitcoin wanted to create, that Bitcoin did create, the government could be as powerful as he wanted, but he would not be able to make more Bitcoin out of thin air and devalue the currency, because it just wouldn't work that way.
Yes.
So that was one. As I read history, and as I read the white paper, that was one of the critical motivators for inventing this new currency with those properties. Making sure that there wasn't a central entity that could change the rules. The rules were spread out over everybody who adopted this protocol, and they made it impossible to print more currency. The only way the currency would be created were according to certain rules that reward the people who were doing the mining and blah, blah, blah. But it was all predetermined, and there would be a limit of, you're never going to have more than that ceiling amount of Bitcoins from the way the thing is designed. And this would guarantee that you could not have a devaluation of the Bitcoin due to someone deciding to make more out of nothing.
Absolutely. Okay, so it's all looking quite good so far. We've solved the spend problem. We've solved we have a decentralized ledger, they call it. The other thing about that Bitcoin was very kind of proud about, that was sort of the shiny new thing, was that it was intended to be anonymous. Could you sort of talk about how that's gone? Or
So the anonymity of Bitcoin nowadays is a total joke.
yes,
How do you get Bitcoin? Well, a normal person to get Bitcoin has to buy it in exchange for real currency. You have pounds because you're in Britain, and you say, well, I'll pay some pounds to an exchange, like you go on holiday abroad and you have to buy euros or dollars. I go to an exchange, and whatever the current rate of exchange is, I pay pounds and I get Bitcoin. Now, in the years since the publication of the paper in 2009, Bitcoin has been under the scrutiny of governments, and so there's a lot of regulation to a large extent to protect the unsuspecting people who would otherwise have their savings erased by crooks, where you can only trade with these exchanges if you send them a copy of your passport and all that stuff. So there's obviously a log of you went that day and bought that many Bitcoin for that many pounds and so on. So you can then spend your Bitcoins, but it's not going to be anonymous. So in the so-called blockchain, which we haven't really gone into detail about, there's going to be a record of all the transactions. These Bitcoins were spent and sent to this other thing. And even though the source and destination are some identifiers that don't have your name attached to it, if someone is able to go into the records of the exchange must have track of the fact that this identifier is associated with you.
yeah,
But because by law they have to keep track of all these things for anti-money laundering and so on and so on. So nowadays, if you get your Bitcoin by exchanging currency for Bitcoin, then of course there's a trail, and it is technically possible to go and find out where your Bitcoin came from. Now, originally, the Bitcoin were generated as a reward for mining. Okay, so mining, another thing that would take another 10 minutes to explain what it means, but assuming people have some general idea about mining, you could make coins out of nothing as a reward for mining.
yes,
Now, in that case, those ones, if in your bedroom you run your computer all night, every night, in the hope they will mine a block, and one day it mines a block, then that Bitcoin, that's the reward for that block, is yours, and nobody knows that you're David, right? That Bitcoin is associated with some identifier that until now nobody knows who it is, and you can spend it, and still nobody knows that it's you spending it, and so that's all good. However, good from an anonymity viewpoint. Nowadays, nobody can afford to mine things because of two reasons. One is that by design, the Bitcoin protocol increases the difficulty of mining to ensure that across the whole world there's basically one new block mined every 10 minutes. So as people become more interested in Bitcoin and more people try to mine, and there's more competition, and they buy bigger computers and they make special chips that are dedicated to mining Bitcoin and so on, which would normally make it quicker to solve these puzzles, then the difficulty of the puzzles is tuned up to reach an equilibrium where, given the available computing power, there's still only one block discovered every 10 minutes. And so on that basis, the difficulty has increased so much since 2009 that even though back then you could mine Bitcoin in your bedroom, nowadays it's totally inconceivable. You could wait for 100 years and still not find one. So it's only big pools of computing resources that are able to mine Bitcoin. And in that sense, it's gone from something that you could do as an individual in a totally decentralized way to something that only these big conglomerates can do. And so normal people will only get Bitcoin out of an exchange unless they are the Russian mafia and they get Bitcoin by ransomware. Right? So the anonymity in that sense has gone out of the window because almost nobody can exercise.
So I guess the sort of like anonymity dream for Bitcoin is kind of dead in a sense. Is it worth maybe just clarifying sort of what is the lull of anonymity? I know that kind of sort of when I first read the paper, I would was looking at the sort of like classic arguments of, oh, well, if you, I think it's, they say if you have nothing to hide, then you have nothing to, be afraid of, and that kind of thing. If I'm sort of, just buying a cake from a shop, I don't really mind if anybody sees that. Why is there such a draw, in a sense, for anonymity with transactions?
Well, there's a lot of control and oppressive control that can be exerted on individuals by entities that can see everything they spend. And even more so if they can also affect whether their money works or not. Is even more terrible. So, but if you are in a democracy and you believe it's a democracy, and you think, well, I'm just a regular person and I'm not doing anything illegal, so why should I work? That's a somewhat narrow-minded viewpoint, in my opinion.
Yep.
Because with the digital society, there is so much power that's at the fingertips of those in the center, that if you ever end up, because it's a democracy, anybody could get elected, if you ever end up with someone bad at the levers of power, then they have so much control over what happens that it's going to be really difficult for anybody who disagrees and says, I don't think that person is actually doing the good of the nation or the good of humanity or whatever. They're going to have a really hard life as a dissident if the guy at the top, who was arguably not the person who should have been at the top,
yes,
has all this power to see what to do. If I am the Hitler at the top, and I have powers that Hitler never had, of seeing every penny that you spend, then I can track you anywhere. You can't hide from me because I can always find, and it's a database search, so it's not like I have to spend lots of research. I can follow you anywhere you go.
Yes.
If you want to, change address so that I can knock on your door and take you to jail, well, I can see where you pay rent, I can see where you pay electricity, and so on. And with total visibility of all financial transactions, it's really a police state, which I don't think is a wise idea to deploy as infrastructure in a civilized society. So that I believe that there should be some amount of invisibility by design. There should be something that, even if I'm honest, I don't want my house to be made of glass by government mandate, right?
Yes.
I want to be able to have opaque walls. I want to be able to have clothes on. I want to be able to not be forced to disclose how much is in my wallet and where am I spending it today. It's my business. And it's not because it's illegal, but it's because I expect to have some right to privacy because this is part of my autonomy. If I am observed in everything that I do, then I don't have autonomy because for anything I do, there's going to be a million ways that I can be blackmailed for having done it. Right?
Yes.
And so there has to be, I believe, in a society where I'd be happy living in, some allowance for not having to disclose everything I do.
Yeah, awesome. And I think there is some kind of trade-off there. You were saying as well, if it was true that any transaction could go under the kind of covers, like if there were millions of pounds being passed over, then it would be quite easy to do like political bribes. It'd be easy to have kind of like mafias being set up and things.
Well, there's obviously the tension between two opposite things, both of which are bad. One bad thing is that if there's total observability, then I have no privacy, and I'm basically forced to behave because otherwise I can be singled out, I can be punished, and so on.
Yes, and when things don't
way,
become a democracy, as they sort of inevitably do sometimes, then that becomes a huge issue.
The opposite way, if there is total invisibility,
Yep.
then all sorts of bad things can be done, and there's no recourse, there's no way that you can investigate crimes, there's no way that you can punish things that have obviously been done that shouldn't have been done. And we see this with the ransomware example that I gave earlier, where money is paid to criminals who have locked the files of your system and demand money to unlock them, in a way where before these cryptocurrencies, the FBI or equivalent would go and follow the money as it gets paid, and then finally catch the criminals by following this trail. Now, if this trail is totally anonymous by design of the cryptocurrency, then the money goes into a black hole, and there's nothing else you can do. And so in that sense, the cryptocurrencies with total anonymity are an enabler of crime that we've never had before, because previously that was always the case. If you did crime and you wanted to profit from it, you didn't do crime just for vandalism or sadism, but for financial greed,
yes,
then to satisfy that greed you had to receive the money somehow, and by following that money, if it was large enough amounts you couldn't not notice where the large amounts of money were going, then you could eventually locate the criminals. If all this becomes totally opaque, then the honest people in society lose the ability to stop the criminals.
Yeah, that's an interesting trade-off there. So just coming back to sort of Bitcoin then, in its kind of golden days, it was sort of seen as this, it's fully anonymous, fully decentralized. All the buzzwords were sort of flying about. How close to that sort of dream has Bitcoin got? Because I think in the sort of present times, it's become quite a bad thing for society. Would you agree with that, or?
Well, what I noticed, and one of the many points I made in this paper that you picked up, is that Bitcoin, as it is now, and as it has become as soon as it started to become kind of popular, let's say in double quotes, has never been what it was allegedly introduced for, which is money that you could use as a payment system. Because to a first approximation, nobody's ever used Bitcoin for paying anything to any substantial degree. The total economy of Bitcoin, how much of this has ever been used for paying things? Only a small sliver, and most of it has been used just for speculation in the expectation that Bitcoin was the future of currency and therefore it would become worth a lot more, which has been true in the sense that originally a Bitcoin was a tiny fraction of a cent, and then a few years later it was tens of thousands of pounds or dollars or whatever. Yes. And so someone who had got some Bitcoin at the time it started and had held on to it would have got a return of a million times bigger, which you're never going to get through anything else. So that's fantastic. And so you have many people who are super keen on Bitcoin because they happen to time this very volatile wave and buy at some point that was much lower than what they could resell it at later. Now there's always obviously also there have always also been people who have been caught the opposite way, that when there was lots of hype about Bitcoin, Bitcoin is going, look, in just a few months it's gone from $10,000 per Bitcoin to 20,000 to 30,000, now it's 50,000, now it's going to be 60,000 next month. Yeah, let me buy some before it goes to 100,000. Then next after that, after you paid your 60,000 per Bitcoin, then it goes to 40,000 and 30,000, and you put your life savings that they've halved, right? So it's all very random, and anything that is highly volatile obviously has the potential for people making a lot of money and the complementary potential for people to lose a lot of money.
Yeah, and I think in a sense it is a sort of negative sum game just because the transactions to Bitcoin are so expensive now. There's the statistic that the amount of sort of carbon that they're emitting is the same as 2 different countries or something. So if all of the money going into Bitcoin is not even that amount of money is coming out of Bitcoin, then in a way more people are losing than they're gaining.
Yes, that's certainly a valid argument, but I don't think that that's the main point I was making. The main point I was making was that this was supposedly designed as a new currency that would not have the undesirable feature that people could do quantitative easing, printing more, and therefore devaluing the existing currency. It was a currency that was supposed to be, this is like gold, that once you have this amount, nobody can artificially make it become worth less. But this is something where that Bitcoin construction has basically never been used for trading and say, well, I'm going to pay for my lunch in Bitcoin, I'm going to pay for the computer I'm buying in Bitcoin, I'm going to pay for my electricity bill in Bitcoin. my rent in Bitcoin? No, because it's been so wildly volatile that nobody in their right mind would want to use that as a medium of exchange. It's like, I was talking about the reference point. The reference point keeps changing all the time, so you can't use it as currency. Currency has to be something that's stable, right? And so that hasn't worked as currency. And the main reason for people to want Bitcoin is not because they want to have a more convenient form of money in their wallet that they can use more easily than having folded piece of paper, and also that keeps its value more than the currency that governments can devalue. No, first because you don't use it to buy because the price changes by the hour, right? To by a large factor. It's not like it changes by 1 or 2%. It changes by like more than 100%.
Yes.
And then what else was I saying? That people want it not because they want another medium of exchange, but because they want something that they hope will go up in value like it has from 10, 14 years ago until now. Those who were lucky then have made a lot of money if they haven't wasted in other ways. And those who buy it now largely buy because they hope that they will be lucky over the next few years.
Yeah. And I know that sort of Bitcoin's often been like compared to a pyramid scheme in the sense that, I buy loads of Bitcoin and I tell all of my friends to buy loads of Bitcoin and they tell all of their friends, and then you keep finding sort of people who are, I guess, progressively more naive or stupid maybe, and then eventually you get out and all of your friends get out, and now all of the people who bought in less have much less money in the same way that the kind of pyramid schemes of the past worked. Is that fair, do you think, or do you think there is more?
Yeah, well, I guess you must have found this if you discover my paper, but one thing that I noted was that when Bitcoin was still pretty young and nobody outside the circle of geeks even knew that there existed such a thing as Bitcoin, then a friend of mine who was pretty on the ball with stuff asked me as a security guy, said, well, competence in cryptography, not really that much, but anyway, that's take the compliment as it came. He said, can you tell me what you think about Bitcoin? And I told him, I think that Bitcoin is very clear. And I went, for writing this paper and putting a quote in, I went back to the emails that we exchanged. It was in 2011. And I told him, I think it's a very ingenious idea. I mean, a different way for solving double spending. We haven't seen that in decades. But as a currency, I don't believe in it because it's not backed by anything. And the point of currency is that it has to be something that I can trade for goods that I want. And to be able to have a guarantee that in the future I will be able to trade it for something I want, I have to have some assurance that people will accept it for what it is. And stuff that's backed by gold, and gold has a history of thousands of years that people will accept gold for some value, which broadly speaking has remained relatively stable. And the point is that it's not because gold looks cool. Gold has industrial uses as well as, hoarding for monetary substitutes, blah, blah, blah. There are things for which gold is used, and if I wanted, I could always, go to the people who make the wires and the electronics, or the dentist, or the jewelers, or whoever uses gold for an industrial reason, and sell to them to use. Whereas Bitcoin has no intrinsic value and is not backed by any other asset. And in that sense, it doesn't give me any guarantee that in 10 years' time, if I hold 3 Bitcoin, people will give me anything for them, because it could have gone out of fashion. There's nothing that says these 3 Bitcoin have some value, other than the fact that plenty of people want Bitcoin today.
Yeah. And that's the kind of
thing. And that's the answer I gave to him in 2011. That's the answer I will still give him now. I mean, it's true that if I had bought these 3 Bitcoins in 2011, I'd be very rich. But that's true of anything that's highly volatile, and it's just luck of the draw that it worked this way. So I don't believe in Bitcoin as currency because it is not backed by anything other than because plenty of people hope that it will become big. Now, I may be entitled to my opinion, and I'm not the highest authority on monetary policy and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
But people who are much more qualified than me, including one of my heroes, Warren Buffett, who's has been at some point the richest person in the world, is still in the top 10, and is a nonagenarian investor and head of Berkshire Hathaway, has said a year or two ago that. He said what I just told you much better, but the gist of his comment was that while he would be ready to pay money out of the stash of hundreds of billions that his company has to buy a fraction of all the agricultural land in America or all the apartments in America and so on and so on, and he would just pay good money for that, he would not pay even a small amount of money for a fraction of all the Bitcoin in the world, or even for all the Bitcoin in the world, because it all depends on other people wanting to buy it off you. It doesn't have any value in as of itself. And I felt vindicated. I said, well, someone much more clever than I am says this thing which I said back to 2011 to my friend. I mean, I wish I had said it more publicly, but he's obviously right, and everybody can see that he is right. But that means I was also right.
Yes. So that's interesting, actually. Do you think that if, in the sense that the kind of, like, the dollar or the pound aren't really backed by anything either, it's just the fact that there will always be people willing to pay, and any kind of scenario where the dollar or the pound didn't exist anymore, either the government would do something to make sure that people with dollars and pounds were okay because everyone's in the same boat, or kind of like society would have collapsed by then, and there's not much you can do anyway. I guess that isn't true of Bitcoin, and is that kind of what's important? If it were true, that, like, is there almost a critical mass of people who wants, like, 25% of people in the world have kind of, like, got a cryptocurrency? Does that make it now good, or?
Well, the fact that the dollar is backed by a country, and the government will do whatever is needed to make sure that it will not collapse, because otherwise the country would collapse. Well, that itself is obviously a strong guarantee. It's not a mathematically absolute guarantee. I mean, if we look at history, we have cases of entire countries where the currency of the country went down the drain, and you could have a wheelbarrow load of it, and you couldn't buy a loaf of bread with it. And that has happened, and not to just super third world country. It has happened to first world countries. Just look back less than 100 years, and you can name examples, right? And so. It's only because you believe that the country is not going to go down the drain as a whole, that there is some hope that the currency that sustains its economic development will not. But there have been cases triggered by world wars and stuff like that, where whole countries have financially collapsed and their money was totally worthless. So it's not inconceivable. And there's no guarantee that the U.S. will be forever the powerhouse that it is now, and so on. And now there's a difference between what a sovereign country can do and what Bitcoin can do, because a sovereign country can also say, oh, you cannot do X, Y, Z. If you do it, we'll put you in jail. Now, Bitcoin, nobody can say, if you don't follow our rules, we'll put you in jail, because there's no central government that tells you what's allowed and what's not allowed. On the other hand, the central government of the random country where you happen to live can always say, oh, this stuff that you are doing with Bitcoin, on second thought, I don't actually like it, because it removes the power that I used to have of printing more money and having my stealth tax the way we said earlier. And so I'm not going to allow you to have this Bitcoin thing that doesn't allow quantitative easing, because I want to be able to do quantitative. Let me make this Bitcoin illegal. And this is something that I also remarked in the paper that Ray Dalio said a couple of years back. Ray Dalio, other legendary investor. And I think it's totally spot on. If Bitcoin ever were to become financially successful as a currency, then suddenly the governments that are kind of tolerating and letting people play with it because it's insignificant at the moment, if he became serious and he became a challenger to the fact that they can write their own rules about printing more money and so on, then they would say, sorry, you can't use it. And they would just make it illegal to own Bitcoin. Like at some point they made it illegal to own gold and so on, because that was also getting in the way of them setting the rates the way they wanted, being able to, if you want to devalue the currency, but people have the option of switching to gold and they just exchange all the dollars into gold, then obviously you're devaluing the dollar doesn't work anymore. And so that's when at some point they said, okay, let us not make it allowed to stash all this gold away, because otherwise it takes away this lever from us. So I think this is a very insightful comment from Ray Dalio that I also subscribe to in full, that if Bitcoin is successful, then there's a serious chance that it will be made illegal. Now, if Bitcoin is not successful, then of course it's irrelevant, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing, like, it feels like all the kind of Bitcoin enthusiasts really wanted to reach this tipping point where, you know, every country is like trading in Bitcoin, and I know that El Salvador had their thing recently, which made a lot of people in the Bitcoin sector, not me, very, very excited. If it never does kind of reach that tipping point and it never sort of goes to the moon or whatever, then is it almost destined to crash at some point? Like, if we look in 200 years in the future, is it possible that it will still keep going and there'll still be people buying it, or will it just always eventually go to zero?
Well, nobody can predict the future with any reliability, and it depends on how much this dream of future riches is sustained. And in a sense, it is the selling the dream that you can also be as lucky as the people who did it 10 years ago is a pyramid scheme to some extent, because if you extended it to, in theory, to infinity, but in practice you reach a max of however many people there are on Earth who is going to invest in that. And at some point, what do you do? Who else is going to pay even more for your Bitcoin? So, where does it go from there? And at that point, you start asking the question, what's the value of this Bitcoin? Well, there's no value other than the fact that I believe that someone else would want to buy it off me for more than I paid it for. Why should that continue?
Yeah. Okay, interesting. That's good. So, I guess if we kind of, you know, assume that, I mean, there's a lot more problems with cryptocurrency that we haven't gone into, and maybe we can go into them later. But in general, do you see ever sort of like some kind of digital cash like cryptocurrency, something which maybe isn't decentralized? What kind of requirements would that have to actually be a reasonable money source, and could that even be possible? So
that is something that's an interesting unsolved problem that I think there's plenty of interesting things to do for a computer science person nowadays about the future of digital cash. There's obviously a push towards something that would work, something that is more likely to take off, in my opinion, on the basis of these constraints that are imposed by governments wanting to be in control.
Yep.
Is a centralized version of the digital currency that is controlled by the government. And so the government would want to let people have the benefits of not carrying the folded paper in their pocket, and have something that can be transferred as a bitstring with some kind of vague promise of anonymity, because without that it's just the same as doing a bank transfer. But some anonymity that can be broken, because otherwise the government is not in control, and so it's only a kind of halfway house. But with something where they can still decide what to do with it, so they would still be allowed to do the quantitative easing that they would not be able to do with Bitcoin. And so the only difference is basically that you would have the convenience of having transferred to digital, but not fundamental laws of physics style anonymity, because that would remove too much control. Not a fundamental laws of physics keeping the same value for a unit of currency, because that would remove the power to move these macroeconomic levers that they want to be able to move.
Yeah.
And so in practice that doesn't seem a million miles from a souped up bank transfer. On the other hand, one thing that seems to be possible once we transition towards that, and seems to have also dangerous consequences, is that if the cash became totally digital, with all these caveats and so on, and we're in charge of a central bank that would have to some extent to take orders from a central government, then it would be possible for the government to say, now let's of course keep track of where everything goes, so everybody pays tax and so on and so on. It would also be possible to say, now this dollar here will only work until the end of 2024, and after that it will stop working. Or actually, we see we don't really like you. You go around and asking probing questions. You dye your hair red and so on. I think that we need to keep an eye on this David guy. And you go on some blacklist of the oppressive regime under which we live.
Yep.
And then they say, okay, so let's just see which are the pounds that David has. Let's just erase them. Okay, so you wake up tomorrow morning and you found you have no more money. But we can do this selective. You can do this just for you. Okay, and so this incredible power that could be given to a government that ran digital cash operation any way it wanted is very much more powerful than anything that the oppressive regimes of the past ever dreamed of, and it's dangerous if we are so distracted by the convenience features of digital payments that we don't see the potential for these things. And as I noted in the paper by citing various news articles, in China this has already been experimented with in 2020 and 2021. Money that they would distribute free money in trial, free digital money to of the order of 10,000 people. It's a large scale trial for these kind of things, and that money would expire after 3 months. And if you spend it, great. If you haven't spent it by the deadline, then you don't have it anymore.
Yeah. So if you give it to a shop, does that also expire from the shop's perspective then, or once it's spent, it won't expire, or?
That's interesting. Yes, I suppose that it must have kept its value if it has been spent, because otherwise who would accept it in the first place?
Yes.
Yes. But it's quite scary, at least to me, to imagine that money could be something that I have, in my hands, in very heavy double quotes, because it's just a bit string, and that at some point it just vanishes. I mean, clearly with inflation they make it vanish, but slowly and to a small degree at a time. They make it vanish immediately like that and selectively. I mean, at least with inflation, if they make my money worth 10% less, then your money is also worth 10% less, and his money is also worth 10% less. Or if to make just my money be worth 100% less, means it's gone and your money is still there. Oh, now that's another story.
And I mean, it is a tremendous amount of power. Like, I know, we talk about, money doesn't mean everything and money won't make you happy and everything. But in a sense, I mean, from the economic perspective, money is utility. Given that you can trade money for anything, then, like a true economist would do anything for money almost. So to actually have that much power of being able to wipe anyone's money. I mean, if there's a company that you don't like, if you think maybe Google is being too bad or whatever, or Google's not good for you as a government, and you can just clear all of their bank account immediately. That's terrifying in a sense almost.
Yeah. Well, I mean, much of the stuff that I said is being said in an exaggerated way, and it's not the way that it would happen. But the fact that if we look at the technical abilities of this type of infrastructure, regardless of what people would actually want to do without being kicked out of civil society, the technical ability is there, and it's unhindered by what I call the laws of physics of that universe. And we've seen, now we're recording this in end of 2023, so we've seen the war in Ukraine and all that kind of stuff. There are country leaders who don't think twice about doing things that how could anyone do that?
Yeah.
Right? So why would we exclude the possibility that someone with the power of doing XYZ, which is, I mean, on the face of it, you and I talking in a nice safe room like this, it sounds totally inconceivable, they would still do it. If it's technically possible to do it, we shouldn't exclude that it could be done. So from my viewpoint as a techie who can write code, I think those of us, the subset of us who can write code, should have a kind of conscientious objection such that they only write code that builds a universe whose laws of physics disallow certain things on the ground. It would be too bad if it happened.
Yeah, and it's not. I don't know. It strikes me that it's almost like the government. Like governments already do have like massive amounts of power. They can sort of launch nuclear weapons at a kind of moment's notice. But like those things are very obvious and they're very scary, and no one would just ever trust a government again if they kind of launched a nuclear weapon. I think something like very. Oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's true. I rescind that statement. I think something very kind of subtle, like, oh yeah, I'm just going to wipe the bank accounts of, all these 100 people I dislike, or I'm just going to, remove all these kind of like 200 people.
Also, they don't have to put it on the newspaper the next day. They can wipe these accounts and nobody's the wiser.
Yeah.
Other than those people.
I think, yeah, that to me is actually very concerning. And I mean, what is the solution? I know that sort of regulations exist for, let's not, I think the EU regulation for AI now is you're not allowed to do like biometric monitoring, that kind of thing. Could there be a sort of similar regulation that's kind of just a very fuzzy, you can't do this stuff with money?
Yeah, well, you can put on the regulations you like, and then the next time that the tide changes, they can be changed. So I think we should make, as people with a brain, we should make a fundamental distinction between what is a rule of good behavior and what is a rule that says how the system works. And so the rule that says how the system works is something that cannot be circumvented by an act of parliament or a dictator's law. And this is the only ultimate safeguard, because the regulation that says, you're not allowed to use AI for XYZ, biometric monitoring and so on, only works as a gentleman's agreement. And when it's not between gentlemen anymore, I mean, stuff like, you cannot invade the next country and throw lots of bombs. Obviously, people still do that, right?
Yeah. And that is the sort of the best solution, I guess, to just put things into these systems before we roll them out. If we're, to make sure we're not kind of sleepwalking into disaster, to actually...
Yes, well, I wish it were that easy, because my point is that I don't really know what is the right compromise and the right trade-off between extremes that are both bad in various dimensions. And what I did cite in the paper was, okay, there's the axis of privacy versus unobservability, which could be misused for crime. And clearly, no privacy is a very bad outcome. I would never want to live in a society where everything I do is being monitored and logged and so on. But the other extreme is also bad. It's just as bad, or maybe worse, I don't know. The fact where anything can be totally hidden, then criminals have free reign to do anything they like, and there's no way that you can track them. I mean, as a non-criminal, as a person who does things honestly, I feel I would be at a great disadvantage to be surrounded by people who can do anything they like, not playing by the rules, and there's no recourse against them.
Yes.
So neither of these two extremes seems appealing, but I don't have a magic rule to say where a sensible midpoint should be. Should we say, for example, transactions below £1 million you can do on your own, and things bigger than that, well, it's good if they're logged, because whatever it is, I mean, if I'm doing something that's over £1 million, then if it's an honest thing, I don't mind it being known to other people. But things below that, I actually do want to have leeway of doing the way I want without being tracked. People are going to argue, £1 million, £1 million. I mean, who are you for £1 million? It should be like £1,000. And then, there's 3 orders of magnitude between £1 million and £1,000, and there's going to be big disagreements. And amount of control you have over people if you set the dial here or if you set the dial there is rather different. And so I don't have an answer. And another axis that has a similar dilemma is that over how much control should the government have over the macroeconomic situation. So the Bitcoin style saying, I don't want it to be possible to create any new money at any point, is good for avoiding this kind of stealth tax. But then on the other hand, you see things that have happened over the past few years, including the war between, well, the aggression of Russia to Ukraine, or even the COVID before that, where suddenly there was a sudden, unexpected, major expenditure in the order of tens of billions or more. Money has to be coming from somewhere, and at short notice.
Yeah.
And maybe that's one of the few ways in which they could do it by, well, okay, let's just print more money and give it to the nurses who have to. Anyway, if you couldn't do that, then how else could you solve this crisis? Maybe it would have dropped the country into an even worse financial situation if they couldn't use this sneaky, stealthy measures. And I'm not just talking about this country, I'm talking about any country in the world that was affected by COVID, which is, to first approximation, all of them. I can see why governments would still want to have this leeway to do stuff, in a sense, for the same reason why individuals would want the leeway of, doing their own thing without being monitored for every penny, because, just trust me, okay?
Yeah.
Let me do my stuff, otherwise we can't do anything. So, while I think it's morally evil for my money to be devalued in my pocket without me having done anything, then I can see why governments, basically all governments, want to be able to do that. And where's the correct position of the slider there? Also,
and there are sort of some arguments to say as well. Maybe it's good if a government can wipe someone's money instantly. Maybe that person is a criminal or going to do something bad or that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, maybe some people say, yes, if
do.
This is a tool that will allow us to crack down on criminals, and when you're a criminal, then I can make your money disappear. That sounds great. I mean, if all criminals had their money disappear instantly, well, as an honest person, I would say, yeah, where do I sign? Until I realized that if I'm, so annoying and unpopular and always questioning stuff, one day I could be decreed a criminal because, I'm too much of a pain in the ass. And so this guy is a criminal because he's obviously violated this law that we made. If I keep talking about the Russia and Ukraine. In Russia, you can go to jail for having said it was not a good idea to invade Ukraine. And then you're a criminal for what? Right? Yeah. But in that case, they could make all your money disappear and blah, blah, blah. So if I say, if I say anything that the oppressive government of the day disagrees with, and then for that they make me a criminal, it's rather different than wiping off the money of someone who had, stabbed 20 people to death. So...
So there's sort of a lot of lines to be drawn and a lot of kind of discussion to be had. I kind of feel like if those lines aren't drawn at some point, then they'll just kind of be drawn automatically by just sort of the incentives that exist, and that probably would be worse than just somebody sitting down and saying, okay, this is what we need to do. But I guess my next question is, how, as computer scientists, we're not really qualified for these kind of like ethical decisions and the very, socioeconomic effects and all of that stuff, just because we haven't studied for it. But if computer scientists, as the sort of the only people who have a kind of understanding of the technology and the sort of implementations of it, is it better for computer scientists to do more of that kind of thinking? Is it good to just have an interdisciplinary understanding, or should we leave it to the kind of ethicists?
Well, that's a debatable point in itself. I've seen many instances where the technologists, who are the only ones who can actually do the thing, just say, I just code, I don't care about that stuff. Someone else makes the decision, and I'm paid to write code, and I just write the code, whatever they want. I write the code, and I get my paycheck, and that's it. And I think that that's a bit putting the head in the sand, and that we should take a firm stance about we would only build systems that we believe are ethical systems, that build a society in which it would be desirable for us to live. Now, in my years in industry and then in university, I've seen enough cases of but this is now the flavor of the day. Like today, that would be AI. Okay, if we don't do it because we think that this is an unethical development, it could be abused in so many ways, then I'm not going to do this, for example, AI related thing. Then someone else is going to do it because AI is so popular that the first one who does it is going to make 100 million, so they're going to be the ones who do it anyway. So in that case, if I don't do it, I don't stop it from happening. I just stop myself from being part of the ones who make it happen. And I'm smarter than that guy, so I might as well just do it myself. At least I get some of the credit. And there's a lot of that also going on, which means that the smart techies just care about getting there first, as opposed to doing the ethical thing, after having realized that even if they refuse to do it, someone else will do it. And so,
Well, I think a lot of the time it's not enough to just say, okay, I'm going to be ethical now, there we go, everything's fine. Like, so a lot of the time the ethical thing isn't obvious, and just almost as, computer scientists, as kind of like white men, we have sort of viewpoints that are kind of different. We don't, or we can't understand, what other people's perspectives are coming from in some cases. I think that's a really difficult one to solve. But in general, it's like, how much should we kind of say, and how much should we just leave?
Well, there's another viewpoint, which is, just because you can program, you're not entitled to make the decisions on how society should work. That should be a decision that's taken by everybody who lives in society through a democratic process of voting for what should happen, blah, blah. And then once it's been decided, and there's never going to be 100% agreement, but once it's decided in a way that society wants that, then society will pay some programmers to implement that. And that's one viewpoint. And the other viewpoint that I was putting forward, say, not everybody can program, and the people who can program should refuse to program things that are evil. But of course, it's not so easy to say what's evil and what's not evil. Depends on the viewpoint and blah, blah. And there's also going to be someone else who's going to do it, even if you think you're not going to do it, and then have you made a big difference. So maybe it would be better to engage in this societal debate, to explain to other people, now I'm one of the few people who could actually program it, and I'm going to tell you why that would be evil, so let's not do that. And engaging that is probably more constructive than just refusing for myself to implement something that otherwise maybe someone else could implement.
So that is just the kind of thing, like, listen, see what's going on.
Well, listen and talk, actually, because not many people can program. Well, at least nowadays, maybe with AI, you can just tell AI to do it and the AI will program it. I don't know how that's going to evolve, but anyway, at the moment, still, not many people can write programs that work, and not many of the people who cannot write the programs, who are the majority of the world population, understand what actually happens to the extent that the people who could program it understand it. And so maybe one of the duties of the people who can program is to anticipate the consequences, positive and negative, of the thing that they could program, and then if they see consequences that are potentially rather negative, they would not simply refuse to program it themselves, because other people could still program it. They would need to convey an intelligible explanation of why it would be bad for this to happen to the people, who could then have the hundreds of millions of people discussion and voting and whatever the democratic process entails in order to have a decision. Because if only a few tens of thousands of people get it from the technical viewpoint, they're totally insignificant if there's going to be a vote about whether to do it or not. They should take an active part in some kind of political process to educate the people, go on newspaper, go on TV shows, whatever it is that you do, to actually communicate why it's a big deal, why it matters, why you should take a stance on whether this should be the future of your children or not.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good thing. Do you wonder? Just something I've been kind of thinking of recently. I feel like computer science in general just isn't interdisciplinary enough. I think when computer science was kind of sort of first being found, it was all very simple. Make a computer and then people do what they want with their computers and that kind of thing. Now it's become so embedded into sort of every part of our life that I think it's really difficult to get a full, almost understanding of computer science without knowing a load of psychology, without knowing a load of economics, without knowing a load of, social theory. Is that becoming more of an issue than ever? And do you think that computer science in general should be more interdisciplinary?
Well, certainly you make a very good point that computer science used to be a niche thing and now is the fabric of everything in society. And so the stuff that computer scientists do affects everybody, whether they care about computers or not. So that, in my opinion, poses a moral responsibility on computer scientists that used not to be there when computing only affected very few people, when there were only a handful of computers in the world. Now there's more computers than human beings, and so clearly anything that we do is mediated by computers, and deciding, to continue to use my metaphor, the laws of physics of the universe affects everybody who lives in that universe of a digital society, and so that brings a big responsibility. Now, most people who are genuine computer scientists don't actually decide the laws of physics of that universe. I mean, they contribute to making small bits, but it's not like they have, I rewrite F equals MA for everybody on the planet, right? But there's something that emerges from, accretion of all the discoveries and inventions of everybody over that many decades. Still been less than 100 years, but there's still plenty of stuff that's been layered on top of the previous things. And should it be more interdisciplinary? Well, there certainly is a responsibility that should be felt, that the stuff that we do and determines how computers work affects people who have no interest in computers but are obliged to interact with computers whether they like it or not. The stereotypical grandmother, right?
Yes.
Doesn't give a damn about computers, but without computers cannot talk to the granddaughter on a video phone or whatever, so has to use a computer to pay the electricity bill, and so on and so forth. And so whatever we do doesn't just affect us geeks, it does affect everyone. In that sense, we have a duty of care towards other people. Now, should we work in a more interdisciplinary way as we go about our daily work? Well, the field is so large, and anything that one does can only be a slight, very small part, that if you try to be a generalist, then you're not going to be very competent at any individual thing. So in order to have, let's say, a successful career as a computer scientist, then you have to be good at one thing, and being too general means you're going to be too superficial to make a difference in the particular field that you do. So I think that if you are one of the few with the talent to do the computer science things, then you should cultivate that talent, while at the same time maintaining a broad perspective on how this affects society. I don't think that the people who are full-time generalists will be able to advance the frontiers of that, but they should be involved in the discussion. But the special talents of the ones who have the computer science skill set, it's narrow-minded if that's the only thing they think about.
I mean, maybe one compromise that they have the sort of the T-shape analogy, like be very, very good at one thing, but also know about everything else kind of thing.
I think that would be a sensible thing to aim for, in my opinion.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, well, I think that's all from me.
All right, great.
Anything else you wanted to add?
Thank you very much for coming up with another interesting discussion.
No, that was fantastic. I learned loads from that. Yeah. Shall we do the outro?
You have a favorite code phrase?
How about lemon meringue? Lemon meringue is the code phrase. If you've listened to this video to the end, say lemon meringue in the comments, and we'll know. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Professor.
Yes.
The paper was excellent, very digestible. I would actually recommend that. Probably one of the best papers. What the best paper I've read this month. So
Right. You
very
can have a
enjoyable.
copy of the book that prints the
Thank
paper.
you so
There you go.
much. Thank you. That's excellent. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, smash that bell, go and write an email to your local MP to tell people about Professor Staiano. Thanks so much for watching. I think that's all from us.
Yeah. Say chocolate meringue if you've done any of that. I don't think you'll have that many of those. All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.